Now, moving on to the situation with the Ukrainian war and Russia. Uh, I've been watching some of it. I've seen most of it. Russia's getting their butt kicked a lot. Uh, I want to make this clear. There's nothing good about war. Nothing at all. But as my uncle, who's a tank commander, has told me numerous times in the past, war isn't about morality. It's about either one side surrenders or the other side gets completely wiped out. And it's sad to say, but it is the truth.
Russia got it wrong again. After one of the most aggressive bombing runs of the war, Russian forces were convinced they'd wiped out every last one of Ukraine's Bradley fighting vehicles. They were sorely mistaken, and now they're paying the price for that mistake.
First of all, based on like all the news, everything I've seen like on HLC's content, which is Habitable Line Crosser, there's the Ukrainian news. There's multiple content creators on here who are supporting Ukraine against Russia that I've seen their content. And from what I've heard and what I've seen and everything that's been presented to me, Russia's getting its butt kicked. The United States released a report that states that at the rate Russia is taking territory in Ukraine, they won't have this war won for the next 45 years. And by then they would lose millions of troops, thousands of tons of equipment before they get anywhere. I mean, their tanks are covered in chicken cages, sheds, and other things because they can't repair their own equipment. They can't maintain it. They've gone through, I don't know, 8 different generals already because Putin's either put them in jail, retired them, and I mean literal retirement, and they're just disappeared. So I don't know what they're expecting because I can't understand why Russia wants to continue this because they've already lost territory in their own country. But they have not wiped out the Bradleys. There's no way. The amount of things they've had to deal with are drones from Ukraine. So I don't think they have.
The incident occurred in Ukraine's Sumy Oblast, close to the contested village of Andriivka, which has been a site of serious fighting for quite some time now. It's right by the border separating Ukraine and Russia, and the two sides have battled back and forth to take control of the area. Last year, Ukraine was in control not just of Andriivka, but of surrounding villages as well. Russia had almost no foothold in Sumy Oblast, which gave Ukraine the opportunity to launch cross-border raids into Russia's Kursk Oblast, taking over or disrupting dozens.
I'm not going to lie, I didn't understand what he said. Oblast? Sound like a blast? Some of these countries with their names really gotta change them? I don't know, because I can't pronounce some of these.
Of border towns and settlements in the process. At the peak of the offensive, Ukraine held control of hundreds of square miles of Russian territory, proving that it was more than capable of copying the Russian playbook and forcefully taking land from its enemy, while giving Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, a much-needed dose of his own medicine in the process. In the end,
Alright, so I recall in a video in the past with HLC where he stated that Bradleys fire a tow missile, I believe. Actually, let me see if that's true. Yes, Bradley fighting vehicles are equipped to fire tow missiles. And in his video, HLC stated that tow missile, it fucks. Forgive my language, but it was hilarious.
And the offensive couldn't be sustained. Russia diverted some of its forces to push the Ukrainians back and recapture lost ground. and in the early months of 2025, Ukraine lost its last slivers of Kursk land. Then the Russians launched a counterattack, with units marching over the border into the Sumy region. But here's the catch: those troops have almost no combat vehicles to support them. They're travelling either by foot or on bikes or quads. The reason for this is simple: Russia has suffered tremendous losses of equipment.
Russia, I am just astounded at how much equipment they have on backup. I don't know how anybody could have that much backup
Over the course of the war so far. Estimates vary, but Oryx has visually confirmed more than 3,700 tanks and 7,500 armoured vehicles destroyed, plus hundreds of missile launchers and thousands of transport vehicles. And that's just the losses.
I mean, when we're seeing literal Russian tanks and heavy armored equipment covered in chicken cages with sheds and other materials that do nothing, they're just decoration, and we're literally calling them cope cages. It's a meme. You know Russia's just not doing it. And there was even a thing where they were bringing donkeys carrying their equipment and other things into the country. Like, whoa. One sec. All right. Now, I will say this. Russia is just getting their butt kicked. They called it a 3-day operation. It's been 3 years now. 3 years. So, if day means year in Russian, I guess that would be accurate.
Is caught on camera. Those numbers are based purely on public information, with real photo or video evidence to confirm each and every loss on the list. Ukraine's figures are, understandably, a bit different, with the country's armed forces claiming to have taken out more than 10,000 Russian tanks, over 20,000 armoured fighting vehicles, more than 22,000 artillery systems, hundreds of Russian planes and helicopters, and over 23,000 unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, plus...
I want to be clear, when this war started, Russia took all its equipment and lined it up along the border of Ukraine. There is not a single force in modern warfare today that would ever do that. Line up their equipment, if they had any competency, would line up their equipment along the very border that they plan to invade. You don't do that. You don't tell your enemy or the country you're invading, hey, we're all here, and wave your hands. It was when the U.S. said that, when the U.S. posted a report about that, they literally said we would just have taken up our Air Force and just gone right along that line and totaled their entire force. That's what would have happened. Any other country, like the UK or Germany, if they lined up on the border, they would have been like, okay, target. And they're just standing still on the border. Russia's inept ability to actually know how to do war is frighteningly terrible. And now they have North Korea actually helping them.
Plus more than 3,000 cruise missiles. The true figures are likely to be somewhere in between those two extremes. But whichever way you look at it, Russia has clearly lost large numbers of tanks and armoured vehicles. It's doing what it can to replenish its stocks, like tripling the production rate of its T-90M tanks and even bringing decades-old Soviet-era tanks and vehicles out of long-term storage.
I mean, they don't really have a choice when their primary equipment's being destroyed. And I love how they always talk about their Su-35 and their Su-57 and their Su-75 Checkmate that's apparently in development or got stopped. Yeah. Russia's new 5th gen aircraft that they're developing.
Repairing those that are still suitable for combat, making modifications and refurbishments, and rolling them out onto the battlefield. However, it can't afford to keep on losing hardware at such a rate. Tanks can cost several...
Apparently they can, because they've been doing it for 3 years now. I don't even understand how you could lose that much equipment.
$1 million each, while Russia's armoured vehicles, like the Tiger or the BMP-2, are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. Every time Ukraine takes one out, it represents a huge financial loss for the Russians, and right now, with the country's economy in a perilous position, combined with the continued threat of sanctions and US tariffs, the Kremlin simply cannot afford those kinds of losses. Putin has already announced a cut to military spending for 2026.
Does that mean he's gonna sue for peace? Because that'd be nice. We could put an end to this conflict.
In a desperate attempt to help his country avoid a dramatic recession. And Russia has had to readjust its military tactics to avoid the risk of becoming an almost de-mechanized army. This was pointed out by US military correspondent and blogger David Axe in a recent post on his Trench Art blog. Axe quoted online open source intelligence analyst Mocklison, who posted on X. Not sure anybody noticed this, but so far RU has visibly lost one MRAP in Sumy Oblast. Everything is done either on foot or by bike and quad. He went on to note how this sole loss of a single mine-resistant ambush-protected armoured truck demonstrates just how bad Russia's shortage of combat vehicles really is.
Well, they're just terrible at doing war. I don't understand why they're doing this. I understand Russia did not like the US trying to get Ukraine to become a NATO ally, but this was an aggressive push even for them. They were once hailed as the second strongest military in the world, but based on everything we've seen so far, they don't even qualify as a top 10.
In 40 months of hard fighting, Russia has lost around 13,000 tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armoured personnel carriers.
I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Alright. Just gonna pour my drink. And it's soda. It's not beer. I don't like alcohol. Though my dad did, so did my Uncle Bud. My Uncle Brian had to give up on alcohol and he went to Hawaiian Punch. I'll never forget that. You take one of those Hawaiian Punches out of his fridge, he knew exactly if you took one, and that fridge would be filled. It's a hell of a memory. Say, can you see the cat eating up my butt? Hex, go lay down. All right, let's get back to this.
And other less savoury techniques for getting people to join the fight. It's famously offered huge cash incentives for able-bodied men who are willing to sign up and spend some time at the front lines, reaching up to $40,000 in some cities and regions. Putin also began Russia's biggest military call-up in years back in April, with
I understood he drafted them. At least that's what I thought. I thought he forced a draft.
160,000 young men aged between 18 and 30 ordered to join the so-called special military operation. On top of all that, Russia's forces are also being bolstered with the expected arrival of up to 30,000 soldiers from North Korea. Plus, the country has been aggressively intimidating, coercing, and even blackmailing migrants from Central Asian nations such as Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan to join its fight, even creating special migrant units to send to the most dangerous stretches of frontline land.
I was under the impression they only had North Korean allies there. I didn't know that they were intentionally, forcibly making their allies go up there.
This is all part of Putin's long-term plan to ensure Russia has the second largest army in the world after China.
Okay, maybe I misspoke. They have the second largest army, not the second strongest.
With a grand goal of 1.5 million active duty members. So far, that plan is working, even as Russia recently reached the grim milestone of more than 1 million casualties, with over 250,000 soldiers killed and more than 750,000 injured. The country continues to bring in new recruits to replace those that came before them. Indeed,
Makes me wonder if they should make a MASH 4077 about the Russian-Ukrainian war, like they did with Vietnam.
recent reports suggest that Russia is able to recruit around 30,000 new troops each month, which covers the estimated 30,000 of its soldiers who are killed or wounded in Ukraine.
How do they have so many numbers?
On a monthly basis. And that brings us back to Sumy, explaining why Russian troops in the region are quite literally marching across Ukrainian land rather than riding in relative comfort and security on board armoured vehicles. Because the Kremlin treats its troops like cannon fodder.
Correct. It's the same tactics they used during World War II, where they would just send waves and waves of soldiers like meat shields. It's not reliable. It was never reliable. If you go back to World War II, the reason why we were able to beat Germany and Japan wasn't due to just one country. It was due to a combined three countries. The United Nations, not the United Nations, the United Kingdom, Britain, at that time they specialized in intel because they broke the code that the Germans were using, and they were able to get reliable intel and feed it to their allies, which were the US and Russia, who were the primary allies in the fight. And the US provided the equipment and logistics during the war to help Russia, who provided the numbers to force Germany into a two-sided war. The three primary reasons why World War II was won by the Allied forces was: one, the United Nations, I keep saying that, the United Kingdom provided the intel, the US provided the logistics and the equipment, and Russia provided the numbers, the men. And that was a big reason for the war going in favor of the Allies, because they were getting their butts kicked for a while.
Disposable pawns that can simply be tossed into the firing lines and replaced a few days later, should they die or suffer serious injuries. It knows that replacing men is much easier and cheaper than replacing expensive tanks and armoured vehicles.
Just to be clear, Russia does not care about soldiers. It's evident. They do not. The US puts more care into its equipment development, trying to make sure that their soldiers can come home. That's why the US is a logistics country. when it comes to warfare. Logistics is primarily the reason most countries can win a war. If you have good logistics, you've got great chances of surviving. And I mean, intel helps. It definitely helps. But I'm telling you, man, Russia does not care about its soldiers at all. They just throw them in there, hoping to put a dent in some Ukrainian front line, only for them to lose it the following week. Like, they haven't maintained any ground. They gain ground, then lose ground. Gain it back, lose it again.
And so, Russian commanders have rewritten their doctrines to make use of the many simple civilian-style vehicles and massive manpower advantage they have over their opponents.
But it doesn't matter. It's not going to help them win. The report was released by the US Pentagon, where they literally said, at the rate you're going, it would take you 45 years and losing 1.7 million troops and thousands of tons of equipment before you would even conquer the country. 45 years. Like, I just don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you consider that a successful war, because it's not.
But this strategy has two clear and obvious downsides. First, without vehicles to back them up, Russian forces advance much more slowly than they usually would. Thanks to that, as Ukrainian-American war correspondent David Kirichenko puts it, it certainly becomes much harder to achieve any sort of, call it a big and beautiful breakthrough. The second big disadvantage is that if those groups of Russian troops, riding the likes of motorcycles and quad bikes, come across Ukrainian tanks or armoured vehicles,
the ones on the bikes, which we've seen in quite a few recorded footage with Russians riding their dirt bikes through, are not being taken out by heavy artillery or tanks. It's the drones, the sacrificing drones that just kamikaze into them and take them out. They don't have a chance. Like, Russia is just, I don't know. I'm shocked that given the current state of affairs with this war, Putin is able to maintain his authority and there hasn't been a coup.
they'll be utterly ineffective, forced to flee or blown to smithereens in a matter of seconds. Russia has to mitigate that risk however it can, finding and taking out Ukraine's vehicles before its troops move on into an area. To do this, it relies primarily on its aerial forces. While Russia famously saw around a third of its bombing fleet damaged or destroyed in the iconic
those were their
Operation
big
Spiderweb
bombers, not
strike
the
of June 1st, and has
tiny
also
ones.
seen some of its jets and other aircraft taken out by Ukraine with the help of drones, missiles and air defense systems, it still has a relatively strong air force. It boasts around 10 times as many warplanes as Ukraine has, and a huge arsenal of glide bombs which it uses to support ground troops. On a regular basis throughout the conflict so far, Russian planes take to the skies along the front lines, dropping up to 100 CAB or UMPK glide bombs each and every day. Their aim is not...
Yeah, they avoid sending their jets directly over into Ukraine too deep on the outer chance that they get blown out of the sky.
Not only to take out any Ukrainian vehicles or air defences that might be in those areas, but also to deter Ukraine from bringing tanks and armoured units into those areas, out of fear that they'll be bombed and destroyed. For a long time, this strategy was incredibly effective, and Ukraine had almost no way to counter them.
I want to be clear, if it was effective, this would be a 3-day operation with day equaling year, turning it into a 3-year operation, if it was as effective as this guy says. I get that there's subtle nuances, but I just don't agree that if it's effective, why has it still been going on for 3 years?
Indeed, in a Telegram post dated March 23, 2024, the Ukrainian Deep State account wrote, "Despite some stabilization of the front at the beginning of the month, the enemy has been conducting a large number of counterattacks and banzai attacks for the past 10 days. Before that, abundantly showering the positions of the defense forces with FAB cabs. The latter have become a miracle weapon for the Katsap, which brings results and has practically no countermeasures." The Russian strategy was clear: bomb first, assault after. and it helped them take towns and gain large amounts of ground for a while. Then Ukraine figured out how to counter it, using radio jammers.
Yeah, Ukraine's gotten very smart. They're doing things the US and Britain have never even thought of. And the US is taking notes. So's the UK. They're all taking notes. They are literally taking notes and taking the information they're getting from these attacks, and they're literally riding away with it. It's amazing to see how well they're doing that. Like, Ukraine has taught us things about warfare we didn't consider. Like the big year-and-a-half operation they had planned, sending drones over Russian lines to take out the majority of their air force. They're big bombers primarily.
That make it much harder for the bombs to hit their targets, with many flying wildly off course and landing harmlessly in empty fields. This was revealed on the Fighter Bomber Telegram channel, where a Russian pilot wrote, "The bombs are still flying, planned targets are being hit, but there's a catch, they're missing. All satellite guided correction systems have officially left the chat. Both Russian and Ukrainian EW specialists have mastered portable and mobile EW stations, which now saturate the front line on both sides, rendering satellite guided corrections for all munitions, not just UMPKs, useless." The pilot went on to note that it now takes anywhere from 8 to 16 bombs to even have a chance of hitting their intended target. Yet, despite the bombing runs becoming significantly less effective thanks to Ukrainian jammers, Russia has persisted with the tactic. Perhaps it has no other strategy, or maybe it simply wants to save face and appear to be doing more damage than it really is. Either way, it's continuing to drop bombs, and it recently launched a particularly intensive campaign along a relatively small section of the Sumy front, near towns like Andriivka, Oleksivka and Kindrativka, where the aforementioned Russian brigades were struggling to survive. This was reported once again by Mokleson on X.
Here's the problem with Russia. Their soldiers are going on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and posting reports and pictures of their locations, literally feeding intel to Ukraine through this clearly stupidity of doing this. Now, it's one thing when the US allows reporters to come into a war zone, but they're in a secluded spot and they can't give away their location. But I have yet to see, it's probably happened, but I have not seen US forces, UK forces, French forces, NATO forces at all go out there and post on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter about, oh, look, we're at this location planning to bomb this place. Ha 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 ha, they better look out. This is what Russian soldiers are doing. It is hilarious. Not funny, but hilarious to watch them just show they don't understand how an operation is carried out. Because any other, like, if you had a command chain like the US does, and you did that, you posted a live operation on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, your CO would have your head in the MP's armpits. Because that's what would happen to you. This isn't a joke. This is how bad Russia has their soldiers trained, their COs are, their general, who they've gone through 8 of them, who commands the entire Ukrainian front for Russia. And it's just stunning to me. It's stunning to me. And I think it's even more generals than that they've moved off of. You know, that's a good question, Bree. I'm not sure. I'm curious if it's just sabotage or if the Russians just don't know stupidity. A buddy of mine, he's been paying attention to this since it started 3 years ago. His opinion of it is the Soviet Union and Russia aren't that different. They're following the same tactics they used during World War I and World War II. Just keep throwing numbers at it and hope something happens. That's it. And I can't understand it myself. The war situation, how Russia has been so inept at their ability to command their soldiers and their training. Because it just goes to show me that people that are put in positions of power in Russia are corrupt. They're not even proper people that should be in those positions. I'm sure they have super talented soldiers who, if they promoted them and put them in a position, they would do way better than they are right now. But they don't. You have to be in Putin's good graces or one of his lackeys' good graces to get up there. And I feel sorry for these men and women that are being thrown out there and dying for a pointless war that was not needed. It's sad, really.
30th and 22nd MRR together with 40th Marines are really struggling near Kindrativka.
I can't get over this. Their post is telling them the location of where they're struggling. If you want to tell Ukraine where to hit you, this is what you do. You're a Russian soldier and you post it on Twitter.
And may be surrounded soon. 177th Marines and 155th Marines near Oleksivka are doing a bit better, but also struggle to maintain their positions. RU is dropping an insane number of FABs there. Many of the bombs fell on an isolated area of tree line, and Moklesen shared images and even video footage of the area, showing some of the bombs falling and clouds of smoke rising up from the trees and surrounding fields. It's possible that Ukrainian units in
Oh, and to Bree's question on the soldiers, I think she means the soldiers might not support this. You're probably right, but who's going to overthrow Putin to stop this? Because Putin kills anybody that speaks out against him or is a political rival. And it's pretty obvious that it's just not going to happen. And if they wanted to do a coup, it would take an extremely large part of the population. I mean, there was an attempted coup about a year ago by a privatized Russian force that attempted to go and take Moscow. They literally were marching towards there, but then they surrendered. But guess what happened to the commander of that unit when he decided to surrender and come back home by plane to Russia? He was killed. He's dead. And it's sad. Because it's this type of stuff that shouldn't be happening. And there's a lot of people that like to post these videos showing Vladimir Putin saluting fallen soldiers, where he goes up to reefs and he salutes, and how he treats animals and all this other stuff. Like he has this great image, but it's clear as heck he doesn't understand how to do war. Because I can promise you right now, the president of the United States, every president we ever had, when they go to war, they have a cabinet. That's why they have a cabinet of advisors that they either hire, run through, or vet to get them to a point where they have reliable, capable people. And if they're not capable, they get fired and they try someone else. But they don't kill them. Because this is the thing about governments around the world, that certain ones get in positions of power because of the connections that they had to somebody else.
in the area, like the 79th and 95th Air Assault Brigades or the 225th Assault Regiment, had positioned troops or artillery systems in the area. The Russians may have also believed that Ukraine had a stash of Bradley infantry vehicles in that location, and they were absolutely determined to blow up anything that might be concealed between the trees. It hasn't been revealed how many, if any, Ukrainian targets were hit by the bombs, but the Russians certainly weren't expecting what happened next. Having dropped so many bombs in such a small area, they likely assumed they'd wiped out Ukraine's supplies of Bradley vehicles that could send their troops onward to take more territory.
It's the only way they may have to protest it all. The thing is, Putin has been recruiting soldiers from outside the main cities. That's the thing. The majority of the media is controlled in Russia, similar to China. So because of that, the people that are in Moscow and the primary capitals aren't people that are being forcibly drafted into the military. They're going to the outer villages and the outer towns that are on the farther ends of Russia that are not as well known. So a lot of the people in Russia don't even know what's going on because their head is buried in the ground and they don't see it. Because when you control the propaganda, you control the media, and you control all the information being released to your people, they don't have the full story. So they think Putin is always saying how good they're doing. Like, let me give you a good example. About, I want to say 8 months ago, Russia held a parade in Moscow where they captured one of the tanks that the US sent to Ukraine and brought it for a show through the parade. It was one tank. I want you to mind you, one tank. The level of cope that Russia, mainly Putin, has to have is he throws a parade for one piece of destroyed American equipment in the Ukrainian war. Because they are not able to take out any of the majority of the US equipment that Ukraine has been using, because Ukraine's been smarter than them. And also, there have been French troops, which was only recently known, training Ukrainian soldiers out on the front lines in live action situations, showing them how to shoot, how to fire, and how to utilize terrain. French troops. And everyone always makes fun of France for being the guy who loses a war, despite the fact they did help us in the Civil War. Like, they were a primary, I mean, not the Civil War, in the War for Independence. They were a primary reason why we were able to fight against Britain. So, as far as I can tell, when it comes to this, when you're looking at all this, the Russian people don't protest because they don't know, and also because they just want to keep their heads buried in the dirt. I'm sure they have an idea. I'm sure they're aware, but they're just not going to. And Putin has that going for him. The only way Putin's going to be ousted is if one of his political rivals or one of his lackeys decides to make a move. That's it. And I mean, Russia on a day-to-day basis threatens nuclear attack if any other country helps. But it's already too late for that. The US is giving Ukraine equipment. The UK is giving Ukraine equipment. French soldiers have already been spotted training on video Ukrainian soldiers in live action situations. It's why the Ukrainian soldiers are doing so well. They actually have French capable, trained soldiers there teaching them how to handle equipment. And Ukraine has been very smart with how they've utilized the very little amounts of equipment that they have. They've made Russia's so-called second largest army in the world be nothing more than meat shields. That's it. That's all they are. I mean, when you take tanks, put coke cages around them, and you now are using donkeys to bring your equipment in, you know Russia's just not doing well. They're not doing well at all.
In the end, the Russians actually ended up retreating from the area when Ukraine's brigades rolled in and flanked them. The Ukrainians were equipped with some of the West's leading fighting vehicles, including German-made Marders and US-supplied Strykers and Bradleys. The Russians, meanwhile, were vehicleless. All Ukraine had to do was wait for Russia's bombing run to end before rushing in, striking the Russian regiments from either side near the village of Kindrativka.
And fun fact, when you're launching aerial strikes, you don't just launch it with one wave. You don't. And that's the problem with Russia. This is how inept they are. They're launching a single wave of fighters, carpet bombing the area, and then leaving. They have no planes that rise even higher than jets. They're known as those big planes with the large radar disc on the top of them. The U.S. uses them a lot, and they use that to survey if the bombing went well. And they're usually 10,000 feet above where the jets bombed, because they're checking to see, hey, did you hit anything? Oh, no, it looks like we missed some stuff. Send in the second wave. Russia lost both of them. They only had two, from my understanding, and they were both destroyed by anti-aircraft fire from the systems the Patriot systems that the U.S. sent in.
In the end, the Russians were just about able to escape from the area, fleeing northeast, back towards the border and the relative safety of Russian land. But even though Ukraine wasn't able to take out those Russian troops, this was still a big win. It pushed Russia back, decreasing their control over the Sumy region, freeing the areas around Kindrativka and Andriivka once more, and setting the Kremlin-Sumy offensive back to square one all over again. Let's not forget as well that the Russians wasted a massive amount of bombs in the process, all for nothing.
Oh, and fun fact, they're getting their ammunition now from North Korea, which has a history of exploding before you can even get it on something to launch it at to make it explode. They're using North Korean equipment. North Korean soldiers are now in Russia helping with the war. Oh, and a little information came out. The Russians gave the North Korean soldiers unlimited internet access. Unlimited internet access, and the North Korean soldiers were looking up adult cinema, Pornhub, and other things, and getting off on it. I couldn't believe it when I heard it, but it's true. The Koreans have no internet, and so when the North Koreans got to Russia and got access to internet, they were looking up adult cinema. Wow. Just wow.
And this isn't an isolated incident. Since Ukraine worked out the best way to counterattack Russia's bombing runs, so many of those bombs have been wasted, and Ukrainian forces have found it far easier to keep their vehicles safe and carry out these kinds of strategic, well-timed counterattacks, both in Sumy and other areas along the front lines. In those kinds of areas, Russia held the advantage for large parts of the war. It had its tanks and armoured vehicles, backed up by legions of troops, hordes of artillery systems, and a mighty air force too. But as this story shows, the tide is turning, with Russia becoming increasingly dependent on sheer manpower, opting to send troops into Ukraine on foot or simple civilian vehicles. Ukraine suddenly has an unexpected edge. Because
this thing that he's talking about in this video is very obvious to Russia's tactics, just like the old Soviet Union. They believed they had the manpower, but the problem is you don't line up your forces across the border before you're getting ready to invade. This is War 101, modern war. You don't do that. And they did that. And they just literally gave away their location to the Ukrainians so they could hit them. And Ukraine has held out. They have done phenomenal stopping Russian troops from getting in there and taking even huge swaths of Russian land when they invaded. Like, it's crazy to me how inept Russia has been at this whole operation. They just throw... Yeah, they did. They did tip their hand. I mean, Russia was considered the second largest army in the world. Still is, apparently. And is considered, by estimations, like years ago, before this war started, and they showed how inept they were, the second strongest army in the world. And it turns out they weren't. They were not. They were this inept. The moment they got into a combat situation, they fell apart.
Because even though the Ukrainian forces have also suffered losses and seen some of their tanks and armoured vehicles blown up and destroyed, they've not been as wasteful or reckless as the Russians. They used their vehicles more carefully and
That's the thing. Ukraine has been very tactful. They've utilized intel given to them by the UK and French training from French soldiers and French commanders who are in Ukraine, and they've utilized it well. They've taken advantage of the instruction material they've been given by the United States with equipment and utilized it well. They even took equipment that they were given from the US, tore it apart, built specialized drones, planned a 1.5-year operation, ran a bunch of semi-tractor trailers carrying trucks of drones over the Russian line just to launch an attack on their big, heavy bombers. If it's not obvious that the logistics in Russia, the intel in Russia, has nothing, they have no answer. All they can do is throw numbers at it. And as I said before, the U.S. Pentagon released a report saying if Russia continues at the pace that they're going, they will take them 45 years to take all of Ukraine. And by that time, they'll have lost 1.7 million total soldiers. Not talking casualties. They're talking actual people that have not survived the war. And over 500,000 tons worth of equipment. It's crazy to me to believe Russia is willing to do this. And we even tried to bring them to the negotiation table, but Russia kept making absurd demands, and Ukraine was willing to come to the table both times. It's I don't understand Russia's position on this with Putin. It doesn't make any sense to me. He's not winning. He's losing. So whatever his end game is, it's not working.
Prudently. Plus,
'Cause I can
Ukraine has
promise you
many
this, he's
allies
not
across
Thanos.
Europe and North America, ready to lend a hand. The US has already sent more than 300 Bradley fighting vehicles to Kyiv.
And as a habitable line crosser, a YouTuber that I watch, said about the Bradley and the tow missile, that tow missile, it fucks.
As well as hundreds of strikers. The UK, meanwhile, has delivered at least 120 mass.
Oh, a Bradley is not a tank per se. It's considered a heavy armor equipment, and it's basically an anti-tank. It can rapid fire these tow missiles and just tear apart tanks. It's crazy. When a tank requires time to offshoot and reload, the Bradley's already on it, tearing it apart.
Stiff armoured vehicles, while Germany has sent dozens of Marders. The Bradleys have proven particularly effective.
Yep, especially when you have inept Russian troops who have no idea how to utilize what they've got. I mean, but Russia doesn't even maintain its current equipment. Fun fact, here's another story that happened. Russia sent a submarine towards the United States southern border in the Gulf of Mexico. It was located near Cuba. They sent it down there. This was during this war, mind you, with the Ukrainian-Russian wars, I think a few months ago or so. The U.S. detected it because their sonar could hear the Russian parts falling apart inside the submarine. The U.S. engineers were able to pinpoint what part was malfunctioning in the Russian submarine. And the Russians were humiliated. And they had to go back to Russia because the submarine was falling apart at the bottom of the ocean. Oh, man. Russia. Like, it's a meme at this point, how bad it's been. They can't maintain their ships. They can't maintain their equipment. They can't maintain their troops. And they can't maintain a submarine. It's hilarious. And you can look this all up. You can Google it. It's all there. The Pentagon report, the submarine situation where they literally detected what parts were falling apart from it. Because that's how advanced our sonar and radar detection is here in the U.S. Because that's how bad it was. And like, oh, man, it's something else. I should bring up Apple Line Crosser's video. He's got a couple of them, which are hilarious. Showing Russian tanks versus U.S. tanks and the way he does it.
As noted in the national interest. The Cold War era Bradley, supplied to Ukraine in far greater numbers than tanks like the Abrams, has...
Yeah, the U.S. manufactures heavy Abrams. Mainly South Korea does. They're the primary guy. Because South Korea is a big military ally and maker of equipment for war. They've sent Poland a ton of crap. Poland spent $15 billion buying equipment from Germany, from the UK, from the US, and South Korea. $15 billion to get anti-aircraft, to get Patriot systems, to get planes, F-35s, to get tanks, heavy armor, ammunition, missiles, and even newer air defense systems that haven't even been fully developed yet by the US. I have seen only one of those. And Habble Line Crosser does those videos. And he does the US versus this country, or the US versus this country. And it's always the US versus somebody. And the thing about it is, the reason why the US probably has a good chance of taking on the whole world is because of our Navy. Because we have the most aircraft carriers in the ocean. We have got 11 super carriers, which house almost 8,000 troops, tons of airmen, I think close to 20 jets, several helicopters, and those super carriers are never alone in the middle of the ocean. They have cruisers with them and submarines defending them. And Russia will always make fun of the U.S. for having these super carriers, like they're just big targets. They're never alone. They've got plenty of protection. And that's not if the jets that are on board haven't been launched and already destroyed the initial target. I'm going to say this, though. The US versus the world videos, they're accurate, but it's a logistics battle. Modern warfare is all about logistics now. It just is. The most common war these days is about logistics. It just is. The logistics, majority of the time, is what's going to win you a war. Your ability to produce equipment, your ability to enter wartime, and no one's better at wartime than the US. Right now, we're not even in wartime, and we're still able to produce equipment at astonishing rates. Because if we entered World War II times, and we're at wartime again, our ability to produce equipment is just busted. It's not even fair to anybody. And the thing is, with our equipment development, we develop it not to be fast and optimal. We develop to also be able to protect our men and women who are serving. We want them to come back alive. Russia doesn't do that. None of its equipment's designed for that. Sure, their jets might have ejector seats, but our equipment actually, like the anti-aircraft and the Patriots, have a bias for taking out the cockpit when they launch a missile. A bias for hitting the cockpit. Not only do we try to keep our men and women safe, but we're also trying to destroy the other side completely. And they call it, what do they call the U.S.? Overwhelming force. Because I remember Biden threatening that to Russia when he threatened to launch on a U.S. base site. He threatened to attack it during this whole escalation. And Biden said, if you attempt to strike any U.S. troops, we will hit you with overwhelming force. And that's referring to the U.S. Air Force. Because I can tell you right now, if the U.S. Air Force launched today and attacked Russia, within 72 hours, their entire front line would be crippled. They'd have nothing. And they'd have to retreat. They wouldn't be able to retaliate.
It's bolstered Ukraine's defense and gained something of a legendary status among Ukrainian fighters. This is likely due to the Bradley's distinctive blend of firepower, mobility, and protection. It's a versatile vehicle, well suited for urban environments and close quarters.
The Bradley. It's just the pride and joy of this whole war. It just comes in there and makes Russian tanks from World War II and the Vietnam era look sad.
Combat, which is exactly what Ukraine needs when defending its towns and cities from Russian invaders. Equipped with a 25mm Bushmaster chain gun that can engage both enemy infantry and vehicles, plus the power to launch TOW missiles to take out tanks.
That TOW missile. It fucks.
Bradley also boasts reinforced armor against small arms and artillery fire, combined with strong cross-country movement so it can be redeployed wherever it's needed. Vehicles like these allow Ukraine to patrol the front lines or prepare ambushes in areas where it expects the Russians to advance, lying in wait for troops to approach before launching a deadly strike, overwhelming the Kremlin's forces in an instant. Such attacks can prove highly effective when it comes to pushing the Russian forces back, regaining lost ground, and making it harder for the enemy to advance, as noted in a recent report from the Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies. Defense Forces counterattacks in Sumy Oblast complicate the enemy's advance and threaten the encirclement of Russian troops operating in Andriivka. If Ukraine can keep this up, it will all help in terms of prolonging the war and wasting the Kremlin's resources, and time is of the essence right now, especially in the wake of the ultimatum imposed on Russia by US President Donald Trump. In a recent U-turn on aid for Ukraine,
I will be clear about this. My stance on Trump is he does stupid things, sometimes good things, and then really, really dumb things. I mean, that's my stance on it. See, I like a president that stands by what they do and then does it. And I'll support them for that. But some of the things he's done with like holding off aid for Ukraine, I don't agree with. Like, I don't mind my tax dollars to the federal government going towards helping Ukraine. That I don't have an issue with. If they want to do that, they can. Oh yeah, he's very entertaining to watch, especially on Twitter when he posts mega paragraphs about the Epstein files. I'm not going to go into that. I don't want anything to do with that. That is a subject matter for something I don't care about. Child trafficking? No, I'm not okay with that. Not in the least bit.
Trump announced a huge package of weapons was set to be shipped to Kyiv, including Patriot missiles and batteries. He also gave Russia a mere 50 days to agree to a peace deal or face game-changing tariffs.
Trump approved 16 Patriot systems to be sent to Ukraine. 16. Ukraine was only using 2. And you saw what 2 Patriot systems, anti-aircraft, did to their air force, preventing them from going any deeper. And Russia's constantly claiming they've destroyed 5 and 8 Patriot systems when there were only 2 present. Now it's confirmed they're going to be getting 16 more Patriot systems. It's either 12 to 16, and it's crazy to think about. We got to build them, of course, but it's crazy to me that we're going to send them something like that. And I want to keep this in mind. The Patriot system is a 50 plus year old, 50 years old plus anti-aircraft system, and it's steamrolling modern day aircraft that Russia has. I want you to keep that in mind. 50 years old. And Russia, with modern day equipment, can't even deal with 2 of them. What's going to happen when 12 arrive? It's going to be a massacre.
Both on the Russian economy and any countries that were still supporting Russia and buying its resources once the deadline is reached. 50 days is a long time in war, and Ukraine could still suffer heavy losses during that period, especially as Russia ramps up its drone attacks, aerial bombardments, and incursions along the frontline regions. However, the more Ukraine can delay Russia, the more Putin will start to worry. He knows that even if he throws all he has...
It's been 3 years. 3 years of this. And if the cope cages with the chicken cages and the sheds on his tanks and the donkeys and now dirt bikes weren't enough for Putin to call it quits, I don't think he's calling it quits now. Oh, and fun fact, Putin has threatened nukes several times, and it's been confirmed that in reports from China and Russia, their nukes are filled with water. Portion fuel, portion water. They're not maintaining them. The warheads that we believe they have active are so significantly less now compared to the US, because the US still has the most active nukes because, fun fact, the US maintains its equipment. Russia has water in their nukes. How does that compensate for fuel? I don't think it does.
Has at Ukraine, he has no hopes of winning this war in such a short period of time. It's already taken over 3 years to fully capture Luhansk and make marginal gains in other regions. And with Ukraine continuing to receive important aid from allies in Europe and North America, Russia is being pushed closer and closer to the negotiating table. Now, learn more about recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict in our video detailing how one of Russia's closest neighbors has turned its back on the Kremlin.
Well, another fun fact is China stopped ordering the defensive systems that Russia sells, and they pulled themselves out of their jet program too, so they won't be receiving those. Apparently, some Middle Eastern country, I'm not sure who, is buying some Russian equipment. But at this point, it's pretty obvious that the U.S. equipment's just better. It's just better. And any new Russian equipment is what they call the wish list of military equipment. But yeah, that was that Russian video.
Hey there everyone, if you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe, and comment down below. Thanks again.